Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Melissa Stewart. I am here with HathiTrust Metadata Analyst, Graham Dethmers, to talk about discovery and access, HathiTrust in your catalog and elsewhere. Before he gets started, I'm just going to go over just a couple housekeeping issues. So remember, please keep your microphone muted and your camera turned off for the duration of this webcast. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat window at any time, and I will then read them aloud to Graham at the appropriate points during the webcast. Also, please note that the slides and the recording of this webcast will be shared with you all afterward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Graham.
Thanks, Melissa. Good afternoon, everyone. As Melissa said, my name is Graham Dethmers, and I'm the Metadata Analyst here at HathiTrust. My aims for today's session will be to provide, first, a brief overview of the HathiTrust metadata workflows, then to walk through the metadata sharing and discovery mechanisms, identify those third-party vendor HathiTrust collections and databases, and then highlight some of the outstanding enhancements, integration, and special projects done with HathiTrust metadata by some of our member institutions. In short, I hope you leave today's session with the information you need to make an informed choice about which approach to take in making HathiTrust content accessible and discoverable for your patrons. On most of the slides, I've provided citations where more detailed information can be found in case you want to look deeper into anything I cover. Similarly, if you have further questions after this session, please email HathiTrust support at our feedback email address, and I can work with you directly. To start, and before I get to the metadata provisions, vendors, and examples, I want to provide a high-level overview of our metadata workflow. This starts with the HathiTrust Digital Library catalog homepage and catalog search more generally. And I want to remind everyone that while we're going to be walking through a variety of optional methods to integrate HathiTrust records into your local catalog or discovery layer, there is always the simple choice of linking out directly to the homepage from your library's front page or LibGuides. We receive plenty of visits from patrons that have been referred to our catalog from LibGuides created at some of our member institutions. More on that later, though. But because HathiTrust is one resource among many others available to your patrons, there can be a lot of benefit to making discoverable individual items or records from within your catalog or broader discovery layer. So here's our complicated diagram representing a high level at this point of the flow of bibliographic metadata and digital objects from library contributions. By showing you this and walking through a small section of the chart, I hope to provide some context for the metadata that is made available through the sharing mechanisms that I'll talk more about in a moment. First, though, credit for this chart goes to Claudia Conrad and Catherine Stein from California Digital Library and Sandra McIntyre from HathiTrust. No small amount of work went into designing this, as I'm sure you can guess just by looking. It is for sure one of a lineage with the creation of the London Underground map. Basically, the process starts with the blue boxes at the top right and left corners, with contributions from member libraries of both metadata records and digital objects, respectively. Despite all of the processes on the screen, I'm going to focus primarily on these small pieces for bibliographic metadata at the ends of the workflow, the sharing mechanisms, catalog search index, and one or two of the applications that make up what we generally think of when we think of the HathiTrust Digital Library. The right-hand side of the workflow, digital object ingest, is covered in more detail in a separate webinar. A recording of that should be available on our site in the near future. The only thing I'll say about it now is that in relation to our full text search, the metadata for that search is pulled from that side of the workflow and only lives in our catalog. Full text search is not more broadly available beyond our platform for discovery purposes at this time. The 974 fields are added to the bibliographic records for each digital object, but that is the extent of their interaction in the metadata we make more widely available. For this session, we'll focus on the left-hand side. So starting at the top left, the bibliographic records are contributed to the HathiTrust metadata management stop on the workflow. This piece is also known as Zephyr and is managed out of the California Digital Library. Every institution here has likely been in contact with CDL's Barbara Cormack at one point or another. At Zephyr, the salient parts of the process for our purposes is that the records are clustered together by OCLC number, and a preferred representative record is selected via a scoring algorithm. And after an associated digital object has been received in the ingest workflow on the right side, before the BIB record continues down to the access processing stop. Rights metadata and designations are added at the Zephyr portion of the process, but changes can occur at this point if there are external data that affect the rights for an object that are beyond what can be programmatically decided via algorithm. It is from this staging point that many of the sharing mechanisms are generated, as well as the catalog search index. From the HathiTrust access processing piece comes both the catalog search index and our metadata sharing mechanisms. The search index is the piece most visible through what people think of when they think of HathiTrust Digital Library catalog search. That index underlies the searching users will do in the catalog. But what I want to convey here is that regardless of how patrons are discovering HathiTrust content in all the modes of access, even beyond using our catalog interface, no single provision or access point is inherently superior or more current. The choice you make will likely to be dependent on the amount of local control you want over the metadata, your research projects, the resources available for your institution, and which manner of presentation you think will be most useful for your patrons. This is a good point for me to remind everyone what was implied on the previous slide, that the metadata that we share out is effectively our contributors' metadata, making it our contributors' catalog, although we're not a consortium or a union catalog. There is nothing beyond rights data and catalog or item-specific URLs that we share that was not contributed by a member earlier in the process. We consider the canonical records to reside with the contributing institutions, and as such, to put a spin on the old WYSIWYG adage, what you see is what we received. With that background, let's move to looking at the sharing mechanisms. The three primary metadata provisions we offer are our bibliographic API, our OAI PMH feed, and what we call the Hathi files. This chart details the major points for comparison between those three provisions. The most complete set of our metadata we offer is the full download of the Hathi files, which contains an entry for every item in HathiTrust, full view or limited view. And while the bibliographic API can theoretically return every record in full mark, it does need specific identifiers to be queried and is not intended for bulk use. The OAI feed contains only those items that are open for full view in the US, as you would expect from an OAI PMH feed. And again, these slides will be made available along with a recording for the session later, so I'm just going to breeze past this comparative chart beyond that. So HathiTrust has an OAI PMH feed that is maintained as part of the broader University of Michigan Library OAI feed. As such, it is categorized as a set within that feed, rather than its own separate top-level feed. The feed itself is also rather unwieldy, partly because it is part of a much larger feed, and also partly because there are still millions of records even within the HathiTrust set, and therefore takes time to page through. We've also received reports of timeouts. We're planning to bring the feed more into the present soon, but as yet, that isn't roadmapped. Through our feed, we offer our metadata in two different formats: Mark 21, which is only a subset of the full Mark record, and unqualified Dublin Core. The major difference beyond those inherent to each standard is that the Dublin Core feed also includes the deleted records, and as such has a slightly larger overall record count. What you get in the Mark 21 OAI feed isn't the full or brief mark as you would find in the BIB API. It's somewhere in between the two and includes all the fields you see there in the list on the right-hand side of the slide. For reference, this is a list of possible fields. Not every record will contain all of them. The completeness of the records, even in this smaller set of metadata, is dependent on the preferred record that is selected earlier in the workflow I spoke about earlier. It's true here, and it's true in all the provisions that follow. Similarly, here is a list of the fields that we make available for the Dublin Core formatted records. In addition to some of the administrative metadata, like the status attribute indicating if the record has been deleted, You also have a different set than with the mark. Next is our bibliographic API. Something that may not be obvious from the details here is that while the bib API can be implemented inline in local catalogs, it can only be queried with specific identifiers. In other words, there is no way to query generically for a title or search string. So while theoretically the bib API can return all of HathiTrust's catalog records after approximately 500,000 calls, let's say, there would be some heavy coding or combination of provisions involved to make that work in any meaningful way. What the bib API does do well, and the way in which it has generally been implemented, is identify when an item in an institution's catalog has a full view item that the user can access. It acts to enhance what a library catalog already presents to its users. It cannot search more broadly than the identifiers already present in the local catalog. To ingest or integrate all of HathiTrust's full view content, you would need to use either the OAI feed I just spoke about, or manipulate the Hathi files, about which more in a moment, to show you only those records available for full view. The bib API returns JSON for either brief or full mark, depending on the URL and coding of the API call. There is a wider array of metadata made available in this approach, as you can see in the list, a little closer to what an institution would have within its own catalog. That massive JSON mark in the background of the slide is one of the full mark returns for Moby Dick, by the way. The link to this particular JSON file is at the bottom of this slide, if you want to see for yourself. And what we call the Hathi files is a tab-delimited file of all the digital items currently in the HathiTrust corpus, 17.5 million-ish by the last counting. HathiTrust makes these files available publicly on our site. You can find them at the link at the bottom of the slide. On that page, you'll find record of the nightly updates and the monthly full corpus file. This is indeed a massive tab-delimited file. It provides the most expansive set of metadata for the entirety of our corpus. This contains more administrative metadata than you would find in the previous provisions, most pertaining to rights and access. That is a pretty quick run through of our metadata sharing mechanisms, but they're not the only avenue for patrons to discover and access HathiTrust content. You can also activate HathiTrust collections of databases, or whatever the parlance, in many, if not all, of the library discovery and vendor systems, or system vendors rather. But there's something I want to underscore about that. We don't have special arrangements with any of these vendors to provide them with metadata at a greater level of completeness or granularity than anything I've already discussed. They make use of the same sharing resources available to anyone that wants them. We're working on revisiting our sharing policies and our metadata sharing task force right now. But even then, any changes we'd make to that policy would be similarly applied across the board to member institutions and for-profit vendors alike. In each of the vendors, you'll usually find anywhere between 2 and 4 collections, depending on how they decide to divvy up the records by rights and access. The most granular I've seen would be something like you see there in those bullets, with the 4th being those records with only limited view access. We are up to date with all of the vendors. I've worked with each of them to ensure timely ingestion and correct internal mapping. I know in the past there have been some consternation about staleness of data, proper identification of full view versus limited view records, and inactive links. These should no longer be issues. And at the very least, I have been very explicit with our contacts about what to expect from us and how to make the most of these provisions. But as always, please get in touch with feedback and I can help with choosing a collection and other nuances, or reach out to your vendor support contact for more information. Beyond even third-party vendor discovery services, there is also extra work our member institutions have done in order to integrate HathiTrust into their discovery layers to their satisfaction. The University of Minnesota has a plugin for Primo that has been widely used and was updated to also accommodate turning ETAS on and off depending on activation status. That's the Emergency Temporary Access Service, for those of you that are new and are unaware of the ETAS terminology. And while Cornell and Penn State have themselves both created some kind of local database to reflect the full range of metadata available via the Hathi files, Cornell has a blog post providing greater detail of what they did there linked on the slide. Harvard has added catalog links to their Alma instance to help reflect for users when a HathiTrust item exists for an item in our catalog. This has been used primarily for ETAS, but will also have positive results for patrons after they decide to deactivate. And last, but definitely not least, many of our members have used HathiTrust to pursue exciting research projects that are available to the public. These are the highest profile projects I want to draw your attention to. Prices and Wages by Decade by Marie Concanon at the University of Missouri, online books by John Ackerblum out of UPenn, and The Making of America from Cornell, though that's currently hosted out of HathiTrust. I think these projects do a great job of demonstrating the dynamic possibilities available through and with HathiTrust. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions at this time, or if you have any questions after the fact, you can always email feedback@issues.hathitrust.org.
Thanks, Graham. And again, go ahead and please type any questions you have into the chat.
Graham and Melissa, this is Jessica. While we still have people on the line, I'm curious to find out if anyone here has been already integrating HathiTrust records into their catalog, if they're doing so for ETAS, if they're doing so for full or volumes that are in full view or limited view. And I was also going to say, which discovery systems are you using or catalog? We do have some sense of that, but there's a question there coming through. Great.
Do this again, I will make a couple polls during the process and we can get a better sense of that.
Great, so here's a question. We use Sierra. Is there any work being done by libraries to ingest records into an innovative product?
I can't speak specifically to which institutions might be doing work. I believe University of Colorado at Boulder also uses Sierra, though I guess I'm not really sure who's asking this question. I could be telling you exactly what your own institution is doing, but I know that they have done some work to ingest these records into their Sierra instance. I have also been in contact with Sierra and Innovative more generally, but at the moment those discussions are ongoing, so I don't have anything to report, but we are aware of it and I am talking with them. Let's see, was there another one? Yeah, if I can get who this is, I can try to put you in touch with someone that I know has been working on.
Ohio State.
Okay, yeah, I can follow up later and we can try to put you in touch with someone that I know has been doing that work.
Great. Okay, another one. Of the three methods, is one used more than the others? And if so, why?
Ooh, good question. I think that the bibliographic API is used the most because it can be integrated directly into a catalog, inline into a catalog and just enhance the records. It doesn't require a lot of programmatic filtering or finagling. I mean, the Hathi files is like I said, the most expansive set of metadata that we offer, but it is also something that can really only be worked with programmatically or on a command line. If you try to open the full file locally, you will just end up destroying, or not destroying, but bringing down whatever program you try to use to open it. Any screenshots I have come from the nightly, which are much more kind to various programs. I think that the Bib API is the one that's used the most. I'm not as aware of OAI integration, but I know some places do it. Like I said, EBSCO uses it. And I know I've had a discussion with one or two other places that have been making use of it too. to at least get the 856 U fields so that they can add those to the records they already have.
Any more questions? Oh, here we go. Is there any work done to ingest records into knowledge base provider, for example, Ex Libris KB?
I have been in touch with them, and we've been this was a couple months ago, shortly before the pandemic threw everything into disarray. I believe that we do not use KBART format. We do not export that currently as part of our understanding of our own sharing policy. That may change in the future. However, I do think that they could take the Hathi files from us to represent, rather than making just like broad choice databases or collections in their system. At the moment, they don't. I know OCLC does ingest these into their KB, but I know for a fact that Ex Libris, ProQuest, what have you, does not yet anyway.
Is there a location or site with more information, documentation on the API?
Yes, it should be linked on that slide, on the slide that I have there. I'm pretty sure though that it's hathitrust.org/bib_API. I've typed that in enough times at this point that I think I have most of our documentation that I've helped with memorized.
And I'm tossing out another impromptu question. Wondering if there is a format that you wish that, oops, it's not letting me type it in there. If there's a tool or a method or a format that you wish we could offer for working with metadata, something that you are aware of. Curious to hear.
Yeah, and that's a question for all of you. So if you could
Yes,
go
yeah, sorry, that wasn't clear.
She knows what I think. In general, I know we get questions about MARC, like complete MARC output, but as of yet, we don't have a mechanism to output a full MARC set from our catalog, which is hopefully something in the future. But at the moment, it remains to be seen what kind of sharing mechanisms we'll come up with or how we'll change them going forward.
Could you remind us where is the best way to contact you with ideas or questions?
Really, feedback at issues.hathitrust.org is the best way, because they'll make their way to me, especially if they're addressed to me. You can also find my email on the site, on the staff page. So either way is good, but feedback at least lets us keep better track of the questions we get for future reference. Whereas anything sent to me will get answered, but may also disappear into my inbox for future reference purposes. And definitely feel free to reach out. I love talking to people and hearing ideas and things you like, don't like, or want to know more about.
I think we want to be mindful too about the third-party vendors. Could you talk a little bit, Graham, about how you've kind of talked about that with other members in the past? I can't imagine that you're a direct liaison between the two.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely not that. The
Yeah.
only thing, what I meant was, when I said you can ask me about it, is that I have a pretty good idea of how each of the vendors that at least that we've dealt with directly, sort of parse up the records that we get into what collections or databases or however they define things. So that's more of a choosing thing. As far as issues you might have with anything you might find through Primo or Summon or EDS or WorldCat, that's really something more for those vendors. I do talk to them, and if it's something on our end, they'll definitely tell me about it. But I can't help with anything there. As close to them as I am, they don't want me to bring complaints to them.
Thank you.
Any additional considerations for members of consortium sharing a catalog?
Ooh, this has come up with ETAS.
And I believe this is Dave from University of Florida.
Oh, yes. Okay, University of Florida, right. I mean, I mean, for the things that are widely available or that are open for full view within the US, I don't think it would matter as part of a consortium how those get integrated. It shouldn't make a difference, I think. As far as, I mean, like if we're talking about the emergency temporary access service stuff, that's a whole different thing and requires side conversations. But anything that's open, I feel like should work regardless of which member of the consortium is doing the accessing. Because I didn't mention it earlier, but you could, ETAS requires logging in, and we prefer that you log in if possible, but as far as accessing things, it's not, your status is not as big of an issue within the your status within the institution is not as big of an issue for accessing the full view items, public domain or open access or or Creative Commons. So that's access there is less of a problem. I will take a moment to plug putting HathiTrust on a no proxy list if you have one. There's no reason to, if you normally send your users through proxies to different sites, different vendors or different sites, we don't require it, and it tends to cause more problems than it ever does any good. So if you are in charge of anything like that, or you know someone who is in charge of or like one of the proxies, the proxying at your institution, please request that they just whitelist us to bypass that.
Alrighty, I am not seeing any more questions. So if you want to ask questions, please go ahead, but I am going to turn off the recording now.